So, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of today's masterclass is private law and policy in outer space. And the reason of choosing this topic is that not many people have explored this territorial jurisdiction through the prism of private law. If you go on internet, and you can find numerous articles written from the dimension of international private law, but not from the pure private law perspective. And the other reason is that if you have observed in the recent past, a lot many private initiatives have been taken in order to explore the outer space. And previously the governments were the only key stakeholders who were connecting or who were dealing with the issues related to the space. So with the emergence of private stakeholders in this area, it is I think that it is very contemporary to discuss, or at least to record this for the sake of history, that in Uzbekistan we were we were some of the first people who actually tried to talk about this topic. So that's why I wanted to not a master class, but to share some of the ideas, and later you can develop your interest if you find an area of your niche, and you can write some paper, or we can discuss and we can collaborate and write together, because this is something which has not been explored yet, at least in this region. So the other reason is that when we look at the technological innovations, many people consider that these things are too early before their time. So legally speaking, the law should be there before a new innovation emerge, and especially in the context of Soviet law, or in the context of Roman German law, we have observed that the legal action or the law should be there before something happens, or that's why we have codified law system. So the laws are made in advance and they are codified, or you can say that empirically depicted on the paper, so that if something happens, then you can refer to the relevant law. This is contrary to what we see in Anglo-Saxon law, that you wait until something wrong happens and then judges make laws and give their reasoning, and grounds are new formed and new precedents are set. So this is very contemporary for our legal system as well, that the new substance is emerging with regard to space law. And since we are following the tradition of Roman German law, that is also a reason that we should be at least advanced in a sense in comparison to the Anglo-Saxon traditions in making new laws related to the space. And if you look at this slide, I have shared it in previous classes as well. And this is considered as, frame of reference for legal futurists, that where we are standing right now. We are now standing at artificial narrow intelligence. Technologically speaking, we have achieved it, which means that we have technologies which can take autonomous decision in a specific direction. For example, Google Translate or Alisa, or self-driving cars, navigation system. These are good examples of artificial narrow intelligence, means that they process the data and they can take autonomous decision. But if you look at this graph on the upward side, you can see that there is a benchmark of artificial general intelligence, which means that we will be able to make a computer or a system which will be as intelligent as a human brain. And it is very close, because all of these things which are mentioned in artificial narrow intelligence and artificial general intelligence, to some extent we have a manifested or tangible or physical version of this. If we talk about money too, we are already living in the era of cryptocurrency and digital currency, and all of these are good example of money too. And if you go on above towards the peak, you can find there is mentioned human too, and artificial superintelligence and space colonization. So now this is something which was previously considered as sci-fi fiction, but if you follow the work of some of the leading laboratories, some of the leading technology companies who are dealing with the artificial intelligence, you can see that they are very enthusiastic about achieving artificial superintelligence, or maybe artificial narrow superintelligence, which is pretty much possible. And in next 5 to 10 years we will be there where we will have much more stronger artificial general intelligence, but in narrow field. Yes. So with regard to this, if we consider this thing on one side, that we are able to achieve artificial superintelligence, on the other side, just look at the news coming from top tech giants who are interested in commercialization of space. You can see that if we merge the enthusiasm to explore the space by using these new innovation technologies, it seems that space colonization is very close. In recent 5 years, lot many achievements have been done with regard to space exploration. You have seen that only last year we have tremendous achievements with regards to the Mars exploration. We have seen even the Chinese making a new sun of their own. So all of these things shows that the space colonization, or at least the human residential projects or space travel, and the people going outside, it is not as we were previously expecting. It is very close. Yes. This is another graph, and it is also for the sake of your interest. If you are interested to know that where we are standing in terms of technological achievement, and I have taken only the example of artificial intelligence because of my area of interest. This graph shows that all the achievements which were possible in terms of technology we have already done. The threshold has been crossed, at least philosophically speaking, and now we are entering into a steady phase. What does it mean? It is very interesting point, and I request you to focus on this. It's mean that we have achieved all the technologies which we needed. Yes, we have achieved all the technologies which we needed, and now we need different territories to experiment with these technologies. Okay. So in terms of technological achievements, we are almost there, which will lead us to the space colonization, you can say. Okay. So we have all the technologies, we have all the capabilities, we just need new substance matter. We need new territories to experiment with these technologies. Okay. Now coming back to the private law, and these are very basic definitions. That private law, it is the civil law, and it includes contract law and law of tort, and property law and labor law and commercial law, corporation law and competition law. And last night when I was looking for a definition, a very simple definition for private law, I found this definition, and then I realized that all of these components of private law, they have implementation, or the space can be seen through the prism of these components. For example, if you talk about contract law, it is obvious. If you talk about law of tort or liabilities issues, it is also now the classics of space law, that who is liable with regard to what we are doing to the space. And property law, you can go on internet and you can find numerous people, they are selling land on moon and Mars and other terrestrial bodies. And even there are some organizations which give you a right to name uh, anybody inside the outer space. Okay, so uh, you can pay them money, and they can name a celestial body on the name which you will ask them to name. Okay. And labor law is the analogous situation of what we already have with the people who fly aeroplane. This is a totally different regime with regard to the labor law. And the aviation law, we know that aviation law exists now for almost 2 centuries. And aviation laws and the labor law, it is different from our ordinary labor law. So with regard to the space law, and the nexus between space law and labor law will be a totally different regime with regard to the private law. Commercial and corporation law and competition law is pretty much obvious, because the private stakeholders are getting there, and when there is business, you can find that there will be issues related to commercial law and corporations and competition laws. So law of obligation and law of tort, these are two things which I will be discussing today. Law of obligation or the contract, and the law of tort means who will take the responsibility in the general sense, yes, about civil wrongs and civil doings. And for the sake of argument, many people say that why we should be worried about space at all, when nothing has happened in the last century with regard to space, nothing has significant fallen from there. Yes. And many people say that we are uh, you know uh, too conscious about making jurisdictions in the space. Yes. And I found this chart which shows that there is a possibility that we will have these new independent states in Europe. And you can find numerous other graphs on internet where people are talking about creating new countries. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the jurisdiction, or the where the case will be filed, is a very important element with regard to the private law. So whenever two parties bring a suit before the case, and we as practicing lawyer know that it is our delay tactic, that we try to find procedural complications in the case in order to delay the matter. And one of the procedural complication, we always say that, okay, to our judge, that this is not the territorial jurisdiction of this court, and that's why the court should not listen to this case. Okay. So just the analogous situation of this is that when the space will be labeled with regard to their ownership to the specific stakeholders, including state and non-state actors. Yes. For example, someone will say that this is my country inside the space. Yes. The first question will emerge with regard to the territorial jurisdiction, or who owns this special part of the space, and if something wrongs happen, to which court or which remedial institution we should refer to get our justice. That's why it is very important to think about the territorial jurisdiction issue in the space with regard to private law, because this is something which is usually considered as a very important delay tactic in our day-to-day civil suit which we file in the court, that one party can simply take a plea or can run away from anything just by saying that it is not the territorial jurisdiction of this court to listen this case. This is an even interesting and somehow threatening phenomena which is called as space junk or space debris. So we know that there are so many satellites revolving around our world, and these satellites they produce all kind of junk. Is everywhere, and even some countries, if you go on internet, you can find about them. they are storing different things inside the space. For example, samples of distincting species, samples of different viruses and bacteria of different diseases which are no longer on the space or on our earth, different seeds, genomic structure of agriculture products, and so on. Besides this, all of these satellites which are there, they produce junk, and this junk is there, and this junk is just revolving around our earth. It is a huge problem from the private law perspective, because there are so many other satellites which are very useful for mankind, and many times it happens that these junk particles, or a old satellite, or a satellite which is abandoned by its manufacturer, it it hits a functioning satellite. So when it hits a functioning satellite, um, uh, it is a question of liability, that who will be responsible. Yes. So two dimensions of this scenario. One is that what about the security of the objects which we need right now? Yes. And second issue is about the ecological hazards in space, that we are throwing so much technological junk in the space, and without feeling any burden and any psychological or emotional burdens. No one talks about the space junk. Everyone talks about the junk in our streets, or on our roads, or on our planet. Yes, that we are polluting our earth, and too much plastic is being produced, and too much harmful chemicals are being produced, but no one talks about the space junk, which is a real issue. So the first dimension with regard to the space junk is that this junk is creating hurdle with regard to the use of useful satellites, and second about the environmental and ecological impact of these hazards. And both of these questions are of private law concern. Yes. Another interesting phenomena is frequencies. I couldn't find any better explanation than this chart. And you can see that there are the radio spectrum of frequencies which has been licensed in United States. And you can see these are in thousands, I think. And all the satellites, they communicate among themselves or with their handlers, or control room on the earth, you know, through these you know, there is a question: can we collect it and somehow recycle? So just a minute, I will answer it. Okay, so there are so many frequencies, and the spectrum is limited. Okay, and you can see that when each satellite has its own frequency, and many satellites are out there just for the recreational purposes. So people have launched different satellites just for the sake of launching a satellite, and they don't have any pragmatic importance. So this is also a question of private law, and from the tort law perspective, the interruption of frequencies on which some useful satellites are communicating, and some other satellites which are out there just for the recreational purposes, or just to allow a separate frequency, can be a big challenge. So now with regard to the question is that can we collect it and somehow recycle? Uh, with regard to the space junk, with regard to the space junk, I think that this is more a question of technology than the law, and I don't have expertise in this, but I have a rough estimate, since I have been following some of the news related to this, that people are now, you know, launching some initiatives with regard to this, or at least there are people, or there are some environmental movements who are talking about this and who are approaching to different stakeholders. I don't know if technologically it is possible or not, because everything which is in space is pretty much uncontrollable. But if you are asking me what can be done, I think that people are raising concerns. You can find numerous organizations who are talking about this, and we should be hopeful that Mother Nature will have mercy on us and will find a way to resolve the issue. Yes. So if you are asking that we can collect or not, I don't know about it, but I know about it that people are talking about it, that we should collect it or we should clean our outer space. Yes. So contemporary debates among the legal scientists, if I have to categorize, I will categorize in these big areas. The first is the sustainable development of space activities, which we were just discussing, and the space environmental protection. This is the main key area of our concern from the private law perspective. And forgive me, now I'm going to say something very interesting, and it is related to our region from Central Asia. The SSR did experiments of nuclear weapons in space. So the credit goes to us that we were some of the first people who actually started polluting the space. So when the atomic bomb was discovered or actually invented, one of the first experiments were done inside the space. So they will just throw it into the space and it will be boom. Yes, because they didn't know how to manage this nuclear reaction on the planet, so they took it into the space and experimented there. But this is something which regard to the space environment protection. And then the other category is the innovation management and the right abuse. Yes. So at present we will see in upcoming slide that not many laws are there with regard to the innovation management. If I am a good scientist and I can make a satellite, I can launch it from my home. There are laws related to aviation. For example, even if I can make an aeroplane or an helicopter, I cannot launch it from my home as a private inventor. Yes, but with regard to the satellites, there are not many laws which are there. Okay, so is there any question? Someone was speaking. Okay, so with regard to innovation management, there is a separate category of the case law is developing. A good example is, for the sake of analogy, you can take the example of Kyrgyzstan. There was a company. It is a media group. Its name is Klub Media Group. They are young enthusiasts, and they won a grant, or I don't know how they got the money, but they are working on launching a space satellite which is built by the girls, the young girls. So yeah, the young girls are there working on making space satellites, and in Kyrgyzstan they are planning to launch it. So these type of private initiatives, from one dimension, they are very good, that they give confidence and they build stamina and courage among the youngsters and make them enthusiastic. But from the management perspective, if we think, we cannot allow everyone to launch its own satellite just for the recreational purposes. Yes. The next category is about space tourism. The space tourism is, I think, that is now a reality. Many people have actually pledged in this area, and many people are actually very much interested to go into space and explore it. And previously it has been done to some extent. For example, when Saudi Arabian prince went into the space, and Aramco, the oil giant, were a stakeholder in this. The main idea was just to go into the space. Yes, that we have been to space. And similarly, you can find many people who have some sort of you can say interest in flying an aeroplane, and they can pay a huge amount of money for this. Or you can even, I am not sure, even if in Uzbekistan you can find some companies who can can arrange a flight for you in a charter aeroplane or in a helicopter. Yes. So these sort of people are always there, who consider it as a luxury to do something exotic. And these are the client of those companies who are actually offering space tourism. Yes. So when there will be space tourism, which is actually has started to somehow to some extent, there will be issues related to space traffic management. And space traffic management is is as complicated as the aviation management. Historically, there has been very few cases when the aeroplane crashed between themselves. But if we talk about millions of satellites, and they are actually crashing among themselves, there are so many incidents when they crash among themselves, or deliberately certain countries, they crash their satellites in the other countries satellites. Yes, or their own satellites. It is very much of concern that we should think about space traffic management in advance, that tomorrow when you will launch these space vehicles, how you are going to manage the traffic. And it is totally different from how we manage the traffic with regard to the aviation. And then there is a question of planetary protection and territorial issues in space and ownership claims. So planetary protection means many celestial bodies are there on which mining is going on, or at least countries are thinking that we should go and we should mine different elements from there which can be useful for the mankind. On the other side, there is a huge concern related to the ecological protection, as well as who will own. And uh, and uh, it is like you find a gold mine on some planet, and then there will be a huge inflation with regard to the gold, and the price of gold on the planet earth will go down. Yes. Or if someone find uh, uh, a mine of diamonds, for example, and it will significantly impact on the price of diamond because of the dumping of this specific element. So territorial issues in space are there, and it is something which we should concern of. And I have already mentioned about it from the private law perspective, that jurisdiction, to establish a jurisdiction, is something which can delay the administration of justice. And territorial issues in space are not of concern uh, for now, because private individuals has not started going in the outer space. Yes. It is like the laws related to the waters. In the beginning, no one cared about the waters, and later they came up with the idea of international waters. And then they thought that this 20 nautical mile is water is the territory of the country, and after that the water is the international water. So this differentiation was done when the issues came. Unfortunately, with regard to the space and with regard to the private individuals, not many cases are there. That's why this territorial issue in space is not a matter of concern, but we should discuss about it as a legal scientist. Yes. And ownership claims means people are talking about ownership. Many people, they are there who actually think that they own a certain planet or a celestial body. Yes, you can find so many people who have made claims on it. A famous case is of 1948 Magnum versus World. So this person was the person who had a claim on a celestial body on which US government wanted to mine for the extraction of certain elements, and he went to the court claiming that this belonged to him. And then he went to the federal courts and different federal courts, and he kept losing his case. But then he gave up the idea in 2005, saying that okay, you can take whatever there is in space. But the point is that many people, they think that they have a claim on a specific element or a celestial body. Another issue of contemporary debate among the legal scientists is related to the analysis of existing domestic and international law. Countries have made aviation law. Countries have made laws related to drones. Yes, the import of drones, or even as a tourist to bring drone, can be a situation. For example, Uzbekistan doesn't allow certain sort of drones. If foreigner comes and brings a drone, he has to pass through different procedures. And there are different categorizations of drones, which drones you can bring and which you can't bring. Yes. So there is a need to do the analysis of existing domestic and international laws with regard to the space. From the policy and regulatory dimension, you can divide into these following areas: the authorization. It is obvious registration of uh, uh, satellites and other technologies which we launch in the space. So registration means it is same as you get a number for your car. Okay, so you cannot bring your car on the road without getting the registration. So similarly, you cannot launch a satellite or you cannot send anything in the space without getting proper registration. And then the question emerged that where this registration will done, who will do this, to whom the tax will be paid, and so on. Yes, and can you travel with an Uzbek number in Kazakhstan, or Kazakhstan people, can they travel with the Kazakh number plate into Uzbekistan, and so on. And these sort of cases, analogous scenarios, are pretty much possible in space. And frequency allocation, as I showed you in terms of radio frequencies on which each satellites communicate with its handler, risk, liability, and insurance, and the space debris mitigation is something which should be resolved on a policy level. A little bit about space debris mitigation, and this question was related to the previous question as well, that can we collect the junk or not. Yes. So space debris mitigation means when two satellites crash among themselves, where you will make the claim. Yes. And most of the time it is done through negotiation. So many countries, they have launched their satellites, and many private companies have launched their satellites. So what if private company's satellite crash into the any governmental satellite, and the junk from both of these crash into a third or fourth satellite? Then it will become an international law concern. Yes, but it is a question of private law as well. If two satellites launched by true private stakeholders crash among themselves, then who will be resolving the case between them? Yes. So this is something which we should resolve at a policy level. It is not a domestic issue. For this purpose, we need international policy with regard to space debris management. Okay. So these are our friends. I'm sure that you know about them, and these are the richest people as well. And the interesting thing about Google is the subsidiary of Alphabet, and our friend Elon Musk is all about space, and Mark Zuckerberg, as seems that he's a social media guy, but very much interested into the space. So all of these rich people, they have done investment in the space. Okay. And the point which I'm trying to make is, you should remember this for the next 5 or 10 years, is that businessman never invest something which he is not sure about. So these people are very successful businessmen, and they are investing billions of dollars in the space. It's mean that something very serious is going on in the space. Okay. So I'm saying that they never do any investment about which they are not sure, because their market analysis and their risk management is obviously very strong as compared to an ordinary businessman. So these are the richest people, and they are investing billions of dollars in the space. It's mean that something very serious is going on in the space. So this is something which I found on the internet last night. that space infrastructure company received 14.5 billion of private investment last year. And it is 50% more than 2020, 14.5 billion of private investment. And this is a time when the corona was booming. So corona was booming and business were flopping, but there were companies who were actually able to secure 14.5 billion investment. Yes, it is very interesting. If you just close your eyes and imagine how much money is it, and think about what was going on in our world, that everything was closed, but these private companies were there and they were able to secure this investment. Yes, that includes a record setting fourth quarter, which brought in 4.3 billion thanks to the mega rounds of 250 million or more by Sierra Space, Elon Musk, SpaceX, and Planet Labs. These are three big companies. So 4.3 billions in the last quarter. Okay. So it's mean that if we don't know what sort of business is happening in space, there are people who are actually trying to do monopoly by investing billions of dollars. Okay. And this is an even interesting graph, and the organization's name is Space Capital. You can just type Space Capital and you can find their website, where you can find interesting statistics with regard to, investment in space. So it says that since 2012, 1,694 companies have raised $252.9 billion in global equity investment with regard to the space. So $252.9 billion, and the number of companies 1,694. Yes. And still private law is not there. Means that the countries should be conscious, individual countries should be conscious, especially those who have no space law policy should think about it very seriously. These are top 9 companies of the world in 2021. And I was very much astonished to know that almost all of these companies have some sort of space affiliation. Almost all of them, they have some sort of programs related to the space. Okay. So the Apple or Armco, apparently an oil company, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, Tencent, and Tencent is the Chinese one, Tesla, and Alibaba. So these are the top 9 companies in 2021, and almost all of them, they have some serious, programs with regard to the space. So if we divide the categories of space services, this is something which we can imagine that what kind of businesses are happening inside the space. We can categorize them into 3 categories. One is Earth to space. It is about space tourism, manufacturing and launching of space aircrafts. For example, Elon Musk company, which provides services to launch your satellite. And the good thing about Elon Musk satellites is that they can return back to the space and you can use them. So reusable spacecrafts are, the characteristics of Elon Musk or SpaceX satellites. So Earth to space, there are companies who provide services from Earth to space. It is space tourism, manufacturing of devices, and all sort of equipments which is required to launch anything from Earth to space. If we talk about space to Earth, it is more about navigation. For example, SATCOM, GIS system, global positioning system, yes, mapping, and all of these things. If you know that many countries have integrated global positioning system, satellite guided system into many things. For example, there are satellites which are used for irrigation purposes, for the distribution of water, for the maintenance of traffic, for reporting about the weather, and so on. So all of these things, and security, of course, yes, private security, all of these services are related to space to earth. And if we talk about space to space, it is about space tourism and in orbit servicing. This is with regard to the space junk as well, that sometime if a satellite is malfunction or satellite have some error, then there are companies which can repair it inside the space. Yes, it is like you are traveling on a car, and your car has some sort of issues, then another car comes with a mechanic and repair it. So in orbit servicing from space to space means that there are satellites, or there are possibilities to repair if something is not functioning in the space, and you can take services of these companies who can help in fixing the error.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. So I just want to ask about, is there any main organization that just regulates outer space in terms of law? I mean, is it its own NASA or the UN?
So very interesting question. I am going to talk about this in later slides. There is a specialized UN body for outer space affairs. Okay, so I will just show you. And also I will show you that it is not only about the government. The individuals are also doing very serious efforts to regulate what is going on in the space. Okay, so I will just show you in a minute. So if we talk about classic legal debates, which have been doing previously, and especially if you are interested in horoscopes or the movement, planetary movement, and connection of your luck with the planetary movement and these sort of things, you know that these things are not methodological. They are very serious for many people. In many religion, they have very important meanings. For example, from Islamic point of view, our Islamic calendar is also somehow connected to the movement of the moon. And there are so many religion and so many communities who actually take guidance from the things which are happening in the space. Yes. So the property law, this also brings to the question of property law as well, that who has the ownership claim on different properties. And interestingly, you can find a huge set of case law on internet. Many people have very serious affiliations with different planets, with sun, with moon, and other celestial bodies, and they think that they belong to them. And they are not just for the sake of fame. They are not just for the sake of making a claim. They are very serious about it, and they think that this belongs to them from generation. Yes. And this is something which has not been regulated yet, but it can be considered as a classic debate. And here you can see this lunar deed. You can just type on Google buying land on moon, and you can find numerous organizations who are selling properties on moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies. So these people are making money out of it and doing business. And there are people who are taking it seriously, and they are actually buying, and they are actually planning to reside on the moon and the Mars and other planets in future. Yes. So this debate has become the classic debate. And the other interesting thing is about the minerals. Minerals are being extracted from different bodies in the outer space. The question is that should minerals obtained from the space be considered same as the mineral obtained from the earth? It is about possession. It is the question of contract law, commercial law, corporate law, business law, or whatever you see, whatever you say, that what are the key stakeholders which should be satisfied in order to trade something. Numerous laws are already there. For example, if you find a meteorite are the stones which fall from the sky. Sometimes they are small, sometimes they are big. So there are questions related to this, that when the meteorites fall, they belong to you, or you should report it to the organization, or they belong to the government. So the different countries have different laws related to this. Meteorite itself can be very expensive, okay, because it contains very precious metals. This is the same with regard to what we find in the earth. If tomorrow you want to construct your home and you dig, you dig like 30 kilometer and you find something interesting, maybe oil or gas. I think it is not possible. Maybe gold. Yes, maybe you find gold. Or if you are in Bukhara and you dig and you find a big, big pot filled with gold coins, it is possible. Yes. To whom this gold belong? This is the question. Yes. So different countries have different laws related to this. Some countries say that, okay, it belongs to you. Some countries, they have established percentage. For example, if you find 1 kilogram of gold, 20% is yours and 80% you have to submit. And some countries have laws that anything which you find, it belongs to the government. Okay? So same analogous situation is that something which falls from the sky, something which falls from the sky, to whom it belongs to you, or it belongs to the government, or you have to divide between yourself. The laws are not there. I am not sure what is the law in Uzbekistan. If there is no law, this is a good topic to do a research or write a policy paper. This is also an interesting and emerging phenomena, and it is a transaction between aviation law and space law, or it stands at the crossroad of many types of laws, which is the distribution of 5G technology or high-speed internet through the satellite. Elon Musk, that has a very enthusiastic program to provide free internet on the whole planet. Many countries are actually providing internet, high-speed internet, and this is provided through the satellite. So just imagine a satellite is passing by the Uzbek space territory, and apparently it is providing 5G high-speed internet, but who knows that it is only providing internet, or it is doing something else as well. It is possible that different private initiatives are using these satellites to collect data, to monitor, and then selling it to their respective countries. It is also possible that these satellites can be hacked and then can be used as space to space or space to earth weapon system. Yes. So there are not many laws related to this, and we should think about them seriously. Yes. So military use of outer space, it is the question of international law. But as we will go through this, we will see that there are elements of private law as well. So the first benchmark in the history of using outer space for military purpose is Operation Desert Storm. It is 1991. If you know about history of this region, there was a war between Iraq and Kuwait, and then the Americans and 35 other countries, they protected Kuwait from Iraq. So Iraq tried to occupy on the Kuwait, and then America and 35 other countries, they were there to protect against the Iraq, and this is called as Operation Desert Storm. This was the first time when the satellites were used extensively, and later in the wars in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, these satellites were used. Yes. So the first use of satellite for the military purpose, you can say, was Operation Desert Storm. And then there are military satellites which are considered as space asset. It is like you have deployed a tank, or you have deployed an aeroplane or aircraft. Yes, it belongs to you, and it is out there in the space, and it is your asset. And it not only for the launching of weapons, but it is also about monitoring through GPS systems, and to doing spying and all sort of things. And the weapon systems with regard to the space are divided into these three categories: earth to space, space to space, and space to earth. And I have been told a very interesting thing about space-to-space weapons. Uh, and it is very interesting phenomena, so I will try to explain it. Countries launch two peaceful satellites. So there are two satellites in the space, and these satellites are there, and these satellites are there for peaceful purposes. So what happens? It happens that sometimes when you have to destroy an enemy enemy satellites, they crash their own satellites among themselves. Okay, so when they crash these satellites among themselves, there is junk which is produced, and this junk destroys this enemy satellite. And later no one can make a claim. You can simply say that, oh, it was an accident, our both satellites, they crashed among themselves, and there was, the space junk which crashed into their satellite and their satellite destroyed. But apparently they do this deliberately, and they use it for military purposes. And with regard to the military, space is emerging as a fourth territory. Countries are trying to occupy it, and countries are trying to use it for the military purposes, which is very much obvious. Yes. And other interesting phenomena is about satellite versus telescope. You know that telescopes are on the ground and satellites in the sky. We have recently written a paper on it. You can go on internet and you can find satellites versus telescope with my name, and you can read this paper. So what is the scenario? The scenario is that these satellites, they look into the sky, and when there are millions of satellites around the planet, they dull the vision of the telescope. Means telescope cannot look at the sky clearly because there are so many satellites. Okay, did you understand this point? So telescopes are on the ground, they want to look into the space, and they cannot look clearly into the space just because there are so many satellites revolving around the earth. With a huge amount of about 50,000 new artificial satellites for telecommunication planned to be launched in medium and low earth orbit, the mean density of artificial objects will be less than one satellites for square sky degree. This will inevitably harm professional astronomical image leaving trail on them, which means that everywhere where the telescope will try to look, it will find a satellite which will dull its image. Okay, only one of these projects is SpaceX of Elon Musk, authorized by US Federal Communication Commission, plans to deploy about 42,000 not geostationary satellites. Means they will be revolving, which will shine in the sky after sunset and before sundown. Okay, so I mean, even one project is there to launch 40,000 and 50,000 new artificial satellites, which means that the vision for telescopes will be very limited. Yes, and this is an even interesting illustration. These are the telescopes, and they are looking into the sky, and when they look into the sky, just find only these satellites. They cannot look beyond this because the vision is blurred by the use of these satellites. Okay, so if we talk about the laws, which laws are being developed, there are laws with regard to this which I'm going to say, but these are fuzzy laws. Means they are not black and white, they are not in black and white, and we need to make it more concise. The first is about non-earth imaging, the monitoring of space, monitoring of earth through space by private individuals or companies by using of satellites and other technologies. There are not laws, there are laws, but they are fuzzy law, and we need to be more precise about them. And then space object ownership issues for active debris removal. So when you create junk in the space, you should take the responsibility of this and you should remove it. But most of the time it happens that no one takes the responsibility. No one says that, okay, this is our junk. everyone says that this doesn't belongs to them. Okay. So there is a need to make laws with regard to this. Commercial planetary missions and planetary protection, we have talked about it. Space flight safety, if you are talking about space tourism, space flight safety is as important as any other flight safety or any other travel on the road, for example. Yes. And it is very interesting from the insurance law perspective. Commercial radio frequency allocation, in the beginning I told about it, that there are thousands of new satellites which communicate with the earth on different frequencies, and it is a question of private law, because it is related to the liability, it is related to the tort as well. From the business law perspective, yes, if you are launching a satellite, you have to interact with the governmental agencies to get a specific frequency for your satellite. For this purpose, we need to make laws. Yes. And then the technology export, commercialization of the products, space products, buying and selling of it, buying and selling of satellites, for example, from one country to another, and among the individuals as well, because there is a possibility that this technology will end up into the wrong hands. Many terrorist organizations might be interested in launching their own satellite. Yes, and they will be willing to pay hundreds and billions of dollars or millions of dollars to buy a technology which will give them some sort of edge in the battlefield. Okay, so with regard to the important export of the technology, there is a need to make laws. So this is your question, this is your question which you asked me, that are there any laws to regulate the space? Actually, we have laws, and these laws are now more than 50 years old. The first law is the Outer Space Treaty. It is when the Cold War was at its peak between USA and USSR, and every country was trying to occupy the space. USSR was sending missions after missions, and Americans actually then later on said that we have been to the moon. Yes. So this was a time when the world community thought about regulation of outer space, and the United Nations proposed this treaty, which is called as Outer Space Treaty. Then there is a rescue agreement, means if astronauts they are in space and something wrongs happen to them, then how we will rescue them. Liability convention, registration of the space vehicle convention, and the moon agreement, that to whom this moon belong to, and these are the things which has already been decided. And if we talk about some of the principles, there are these 5 legal principles, the declaration of legal principle, and all of them, they have been decided in United Nations General Assembly. It is about the exploration and use of outer space. Then broadcasting principle, it is about the earth satellites and broadcasting. Remote sensing principle, remote sensing of earth from outer space. It is about mapping and global positioning system, and spying or keeping an eye, and distribution of resources by using data coming from the space, and so on. Nuclear power sources, I told you that people were doing experiments in the space. People are now disposing of their earthly junk into the space or thinking about it. So there is a need to make principle, and I think that this can be used as a precedent, the nuclear power source principle. And then the benefit declaration, which says that the space belongs to everyone, and everyone can invest and can reap the benefit of what is coming from the space. And if you want to look it into the graphical representation, this is the graphical representative in the form of table. There are 5 UN treaties, and then there are UN declaration, legal principles, and then there are customary rules and norms which are developing. Okay, so here you can see industry standard bodies, ISO, we all know about it. Yes, ISO standards. And then there are national regulatory authorities. I don't know in Uzbekistan if you have one. And these national regulatory authorities actually propose policies and laws. For example, US space policy, yes, and Chinese space policy. Similarly, there is a possibility you might have Uzbek space policy. Or if you don't have, then you should ask government to think about this. So there is formal law and there is customary law. There is international law and there is local law to some extent, which is, being polished with the passage of time. So some of the criticism, mine criticism on these existing laws, I think that many of these laws are outdated. For example, the space treaty talks about peaceful, but peaceful is relevant. Peaceful, as I mentioned earlier, that 2 satellites you have launched for peaceful purposes, but they can dull the vision of someone's telescope, or they can just crash into someone's other peaceful satellite, and later you can say that, oh, our satellite was for peaceful purposes. So the definition of peaceful should be decided. What does it mean by peaceful? Because peaceful is relevant. What I think that is peaceful purposes can be harmful for you. Yes, one could claim that it is spying and espionage, and it is quite difficult to prove. For example, in the case of 5G technology, people say that we are using these satellites to provide 5G technology or just to monitor the weather, but the other country can think that it is there to do spying on them. Technologically, it is possible. I am sitting here. It is possible that satellite can watch me. Yes. So if someone wants to do spying, it is very easy for them by using the satellites. Also, if the neglect one released too many pieces of junk in the space and those junk hit with another satellite, can we say that negligence is not peaceful? Okay. So management of the space junk, and these are some of the concerns which has not been addressed by existing law. That's why these laws are outdated and we need to think about new laws. Space liability convention only deals with the harmful action of states, not individuals, but with the emergence of private stakeholders, we can say that now we need to update this law and should extend its jurisdiction on the private individuals as well. This is very important from the private law perspective. And then the role of United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. So this is your question, and this is my answer, that there is a specialized organization under the UN which deals with the outer space affair. Its name is United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And of course, we need to think about their role, that how active they are in resolving the dispute, not only among the states, but about states and private initiators and private companies. Other fields of law, such as administrative law, intellectual property law, arms control law, insurance law, environment law, criminal law, and commercial law, are also integrated within the space law, and they need to set their threshold, that where these laws exhaust and the other legal regime start. So these are some of my recommendation. Some immediate private law concerns, and I strongly advise you and suggest you and recommend you to start writing about these things, or at least to explore these things. The right to access and use of space, it is a good question from private law perspective. The right to conduct commercial transaction in space and use space for commercial purposes. Responsibility of environmental damage from the tort law perspective, and liability for any damages created by human use of space. And what are some of the ways to move forward? That first of all, we need to increase the academic discourse, and today's master class is a good example of this, that we students and colleagues, we sat together and we had a discourse, and we discussed that this is an area we need to explore. Yes, so we need to have more similar academic discourses like this. Then there is a need to provide technically informed and enabling regulations. If you look at the regulations which we mentioned earlier, these are from the law perspective, but we need to make new regulations from the technology perspective. And for this purpose as well, we need discourse among the applied sciences and social scientists, that they should come, technology people should come and sit with the lawyers, and they should form relevant laws which can cover both technological dimensions and legal dimensions. There is a need to develop guidelines and best practices with broad participation of all the stakeholders. Focus on commercial capabilities as a source to government missions. And it means that the government should motivate private companies to help them in their space activities. Yes. So, for example, I gave you the example of Elon Musk's company SpaceX. They are providing. They are a private company. They are providing different equipments to the governments, for example. Today also you can see that many companies are manufacturing drones and then they are selling to the governments. Similarly, the government should motivate private technology companies to make different components or even satellites or different types of technologies which government should be willing to buy. Yes, so that's why there should be a focus on commercial capabilities and a service to the government missions. And the most important thing is that we should fund critical research and development investment. It is about philanthropists. The rich people should invest in the space research, and the government themselves should think about investing in research and development with regard to the space. And finally, this is our philosophy which we are propagating, and this is something which we are working on in our institution, in the institution of automation at Chinese Academy of Sciences. And our philosophy is to achieve a future sustainable symbiotic society, which means that as we have started living peacefully and in harmony with other individuals. Previously, we know that there were wars and people were killing each other, but now we have started living in peace and in harmony with other individuals. We have started living in peace and harmony with our nature, with animals and plants. Similarly, there is a need to think about living in peace and harmony with technology and everything around ourselves, which also include the space, to achieve the future sustainable symbiotic society. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or anything to discuss, we can discuss about it. Yes, please. Any questions or any comments? No one? Anyone? Okay, so in that case, thank you very much once again. Yes.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes, yes.
Okay, as I'm really interested in this topic, I'm just gonna write an article on it. If it's possible, can you help me just find out any information on it?
You can discuss about the idea, what exactly you want to write on, and all the information you can find on, internet. If there is a theoretical debate, then we can do it. But as far as the data is concerned, as far as what is going on in the space, everything is available, and my information is the same as you can also find on internet. But as today we had a theoretical debate to look at the space through the private law dimension, private law perspective. If you have a question related to this, then we can discuss. Yes.
Okay,
So
thank you very much.
yes. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you in future.